Back now where we left off. I was trying to show where you could get these flyers earlier. They are here. I looked at the wrong place. You go to geoengineeringwatch.org, and then you go to resources, and then you can pull up these flyers. They have different ones to print out. Like, here's one. You know, pretty good flyers. That's what I did. But anyways, so these idiots, you know, didn't get back. And I forgot to read Raphael Warlock's automated spew out after when I first sent the letter. You know, you get these automated things. Oh, we'll get back to you. Thank you for sharing your thoughts with me. Your views are important to my work. I appreciate you taking the time. I will be sending you a more substantive response to your specific concerns. But in the meantime, I want to let you know I received your message and value your comments. No, he doesn't, or he would have frickin' answered me back. And the rest of the constituents in Georgia who care about this issue. So then what I did, okay, I didn't get anything back on that first letter I read you, so I sent a more specific one after I gathered all my questions for this guy, the EPA, Darren, who said he was awaiting my questions, and he never gets back to me. So I wrote this one, and I sent this one to my reps, and they still didn't get back. And this is it. Thank you very much for your... Okay. So basically, I wanted to find out if anything is being done to stop these chemical emissions from planes over the state of Georgia. I have looked into this subject and am very angry as well as concerned for the health of not only people, but also animals and plants. I have done many detailed videos on the subject of weather modification, and one thing's for sure, they are routinely spraying strontium, aluminum, barium, sulfur dioxide, and apparently now have a patent for graphene oxide to be used as an air dispersant. Now, I just completed a part 1 through 3 series video on the ill health effects from graphene oxide, and also a theory of what the strange blood clots may be they are finding in people that have had a COVID vaccine, which is now known to contain graphene oxide. That's in my part 1 through 3 video on this channel. And it's taken directly from a scientific research article, straight from the horse's mouth, on graphene oxide and all the sick things they do with it. I also have a degree in science, major biology, double minor in chemistry. In addition, I have enclosed as a document a one-page information sheet. That's the one I read you, but he already got. Also enclosed are photos I've taken of chemtrails over Georgia in the last couple of weeks. I took photos of this aerosol spraying just yesterday, last Friday, the week before that. In the video, Chemtrails Owned by Homeland Security, I show a series of my photos and explain how they grow. They also love to make tic-tac-toes in the sky with big X's. What the heck is this? No real plane going somewhere would have the time for that crap. And then I referenced 3 videos, which I'm going to show you in a second. Continuing on with my letter, the video above, titled Ex-Air Force Whistleblower, to summarize, Kristen Megan, who was stationed at Warner Robins here in Georgia, that she was a bioenvironmental engineer equivalent to OSHA and the EPA. Her job involved tracking all aspects and impacts of chemicals used and how they affect the environment. Worked 9 years as an industrial hygienist and specialist at Air Logistics Centers, one of which was in Warner Robins, Georgia. One of her jobs was to see anytime someone wanted to order a chemical, she would approve or disapprove it. Its use with an Air Force Form 3952, and approval of hazardous chemicals. I too finished a class on MSDS sheets while working at the job I worked at, so I'm familiar with these. She was finding tons and tons of aluminum, barium, and strontium in the form of oxide and sulfates, and had already had already accounted for their use in legitimate companies for legitimate reasons. So a whole lot was unaccounted for. Her job was to know what, how, and why any chemical is being used and how to dispose of them to be compliant with OSHA and the EPA. To be compliant, here's the military having to be compliant with EPA, who's ordering this stuff. So why can't the EPA do something about it? The Material Safety Data Sheets, MSDS, always list the manufacturer, but these MSDSs for the aluminum, barium, strontium, etc., had no manufacturer listed and seemed vague and looked as if someone had made it and scanned it into the system. So she asked, what is this being used for? And she got no answer. No answers. So she did not approve it. That is when she said the heat came down on her and she was demonized even though she was a decorated non-commissioned officer of the quarter with awards. So next they transferred her to Warner Robins, Georgia, and she saw the same stuff going on, and when she questioned it, she was threatened, so to speak. It's all in her video. And here and then here are my specific questions I wrote, Mr. EPA guy. 1. Why can't these aerosol dispersals be carried out over some army base instead of a huge civilian area? If they are simply testing, why do they fly and disperse over entire states over and over and over again? It's been going on for so long. 2. Who is at the top of air quality enforcement? 3. What laws currently govern our airspace? 4. Does the EPA test for barium, aluminum, strontium, and sulfur dioxide and graphene oxide? And in the oxide or sulfate forms? And in part per million, part per billion, or what? Measurements and how much is safe or dangerous? 5. The state of Tennessee, North Dakota, South Dakota have now banned these chemtrails in their states, so why can't we? And with the EPA's help, since our representatives of Georgia seem to be doing nothing. 6. According to experts, these chemicals are getting into our waterways, plants, killing trees, plants, and crops. How is this safe for humans? 7. According to the book, The Hidden Half of Nature, The Microbial Roots of Life and Death by David R. Montgomery and Ann Bickel, which I have been reading, and my theory that these aerosol dispersals are disrupting the trees and plants' ability to absorb nutrients through nitrogen fixation, the symbiotic relationship between plants and microbes. In particular, the microbes living on the roots of nodules, which convert atmospheric nitrogen into ammonium, which plants use since ammonium is water soluble. It can then be taken up by the plant. Some trees can get nitrogen from fungi, which scavenge it right from the bedrock. The microbes and fungi are important for converting nutrients and organic matter for the trees and plants' uptake. These aerosols are killing the microbes that live in the nodules, I think. I haven't finished the book and I'm about to do a video on it. 8. What can I do to stop this? What can the EPA do to stop this? It is our right and illegal for them to be doing this without our approval, consent, or knowledge. In 1967, the General Assembly had the foresight to pass a law to regulate weather modification involving cloud seeding experiments, and after unauthorized attempts by a group using planes and ground generators to emit silver iodide into the air to suppress hail in Fulton and Franklin counties, as well as info about the U.S. and other countries' experimentation in weather manipulation for national security, potential weaponization purposes, came to light. Yeah, they always have that blanket of national security. This has nothing to do. The White House last year released a report, Congressional Mandated Research Plan and Initial Research Governance Framework related to solar radiation modification. This came from the Big House. The Big House, where Biden said that's just ridiculous. People saying these things that we're controlling the weather. It's got to stop. It came from the Big House, the White House, providing documentation that the federal government or other entities acting on the federal government's behalf or at the federal government's request may conduct solar radiation modification or geoengineering experiments that violates the Nuremberg Code involving the release of air contaminants into the atmosphere, and those activities may occur within this Commonwealth, allowing the release of unknown, experimental, and potentially hazardous substances into the atmosphere without the consent of the people of Pennsylvania is a clear violation of Article 1, Section 27 of the Pennsylvania Constitution, with the 1967 law for weather modification control as precedent and joining 10 other states this year in proposing related legislation. The Clean Air Preservation Act will prohibit the injection, release, or dispersal of chemicals, chemical compounds, or substances within the borders of Pennsylvania into the atmosphere for purposes which include affecting temperature, weather, intensity of sunlight. This legislation was introduced in Rhode Island, New Hampshire, Illinois, South Dakota, Missouri, Kentucky, South Carolina, Minnesota, and Ohio, and passed into law in Tennessee, but not in Georgia. Ditto in Georgia. Or what about Florida with DeSantis? Nothing. And I want to get to this, just a quick excerpt of this video here. This is Rosalind Peterson at the United Nations. This was some time back, some while ago. Let's see, it started, it's over here, 6.55. It's titled, Is Geoengineering Killing Our Trees? And here she is. It's hardly a conspiracy.
Is, how do you like your skies, natural or man-made? And right now, we are making man-made clouds. And this is trapping warmth in our atmosphere. The climate change that is produced by these jets, not all jets, mostly some non-commercial, but what happens to our skies is that we start to see the changes. The man-made clouds do trap the warmth, and they increase the humidity. This allows for pests to proliferate, diseases, molds, mildews, funguses, and viruses. This is a man-made cloud, ladies and gentlemen, and these pictures I took myself over Northern California, and this is a burst. This is where a jet left a huge plume, and then this turned in at the end of it to a burst. And this is not normal, never seen before in our county historically, and I was born and raised there. This is another picture showing the jet trail just before the burst. This is our skies, and I want you to know that what you're seeing now, a lot of times many scientists know, especially at NASA and in other areas, that the skies that we're seeing are not normal cloud formations. These are man-made. And what happens as we reduce the amount of sunlight in a form of global dimming, we reduce the solar power with these type of clouds, and we reduce photosynthesis, which is going to impact agriculture. The pictures look odd. The formations don't look like normal clouds that people have seen before historically. This is another type of man-made cloud, and what we have done and what you're seeing here is we have the photographs from the times that the jet leaves the first trail as a thin, spindly trail to where they form into these different types of cloud formations. All of you can start looking up and seeing this. What happens is that there are experiments, and there's a color, you can see some color in this photograph. And part of what we're doing also is we're sending up canisters. The United States government, NASA, the U.S. Air Force, is sending up canisters into the atmosphere filled with chemicals to modify and experiment with our ionosphere. And when we modify and experiment with our ionosphere up here, we create experiments which they can see through these persistent jet contrails as they stay in the sky for long periods of time, and they can watch the experiments. The type of chemicals they are using are aluminum, barium, strontium, and these canisters are sent up on rockets, and what they do is they superheat the canisters to create experiments in our atmosphere. The experiments can give you colorful auroras, which they talk about as being wonderful. Many times people think that the auroras in Alaska and the ones we see are normal, but there's beginning to be more and more seen across the United States and elsewhere where trimethyl aluminum experiments to make clouds are beginning to impact us. The reason I am concerned for agriculture is that none of these experiments have any public oversight nor agricultural oversight. Our drinking water is impacted because the chemicals are now beginning to show up in our drinking water. In California, the State Department of Health drinking water tests were examined between 1970 and this year, and we found unusual spiking in barium, aluminum, strontium, magnesium, calcium, manganese, and all of these spiked at the same time in various drinking water supplies across the state of California and also in Arizona. So what's happening with these atmospheric tests is that aluminum, as one example, gets into, with increased pollution and acid rain, gets into the root systems of our crop trees and our trees, and it looks like the trees are dying of drought. But they're not. What happens is that the root systems can no longer absorb the water and the nutrients needed to survive. Many of our forests in Redding, California, and other areas are dying. The oak trees, the redwood trees, the Douglas fir, across the United States, many areas. We believe that these trees are impacted because they cannot absorb enough water because aluminum
nutrients
is going into their root systems.
Because I think it's killing the microbes.
And fungus from warmer temperatures produced by persistent jet contrails are also allowing pests and molds to proliferate, also impacting tree health and crop health.
Yeah. Let's take a close look at what.
And that was Rosalind Peterson. And that's what I'm saying. Well, that's what the next video I'm doing. I've been reading this book. And let me play this excerpt. This was ex-U.S. Air Force officer.
Make sure I knew everything that you did, what you were exposed to, and how to mitigate and engineer out those hazards. Because we needed to, one, it's your legal right to be working in a safe and healthful work environment. So throughout 9 years, I worked as an industrial hygienist and an environmental specialist. There's 2 bases I was at that are called air logistics centers. What does that mean? It's not like a fighter wing, it's not really fun and amazing. What they did is they took aircraft that around every 10 to 15 years, they were required to be dismantled down to the last screw. So that meant every single industrial process you can think about, checking the metal integrity, making sure everything's good to go, or sometimes overhauling equipment. Part of my job in tracking the health hazards was to look at any time someone wanted to buy a chemical, any type of chemical. It was ordered through a system, and in that system, I had to go in there and say, the country we're in, we're not allowed to use this. We need to substitute it out with something a little less hazardous, while also maintaining the integrity for a technical order, meaning for that process it says you must use, xylene or toluene to do this process. Well, I have to kind of fast forward. I want to say around 2006, I started kind of opening my eyes to how the military wasn't really what I thought it was. And people approached me knowing what I did for a living and said, "Have you ever heard of chemtrails?" Well, I hadn't. And that sparked my interest. So I went online and I looked at chemtrails. I saw a lot of, debunking, a lot of sites that were just kind of calling it a conspiracy theory. And I thought, well, geez, this is what I do for a living. Preventive health, making sure that people are not getting sick, especially in the workplace, and by things that we're doing that can affect, human health and the environment.
Look what water weight does to your body. Number 1, stop drinking too much water. People
in the workplace and by things that we're doing that can affect, human health and the environment. To summarize it, in an attempt to debunk this conspiracy theory as I thought it was, I didn't debunk it. It literally changed my life. Like I said, this is hard for me because it's not easy standing here and telling my story. One day I was going through that computer system, which if you want to look it up, it's called an Air Force Form 3952. It is the approval of hazardous materials. I was finding tons and tons of large quantities of aluminum, barium, strontium in the forms of oxides and sulfates. And of course I knew that there's industrial processes you may not have heard of, but it's bead blasting, pneumatic sanding, shot peening. There is certain medias that's similar to that is used. However, I had already accounted for that. I would sit and look at this computer system and say, this shop wants to order this paint. I'm going to tie it to a task. We had to know what was being used, why it was being used, tracking it cradle to grave on how we were going to dispose of it to be compliant with OSHA and the EPA. One of the legal requirements...
Yeah, they have to be properly disposed of. By the way, apparently your source is Warner Robins, Georgia. That's one place I guess they're ordering that crap, using it.
Approving these is looking at what used to be called the material safety data sheet. On that sheet, it's going to list the manufacturer. It's going to list some maybe acquired personal protective equipment that needs to be used, or some...
So everything's fraud. This ought to be renamed to the United States of Fraud. I'm serious.
To mitigate the exposures. These electronic MSDSs did not have a manufacturer name. They were very vague. They almost looked to me like somebody had made it and scanned it into the system. So I asked the question, what is this being used for? I never got an answer, so I didn't approve it. And it sat there. And then the heat came down. Why are you behind on your 3952s? Only a select few of us did that. So I started asking questions. And at that point, my demonization began. You know, I made my rank. I was decorated. I was a non-commissioned officer of the quarter. I won lots of awards. I had no reason for anyone to attempt to demonize me. So then I get moved over to the other Air Logistics Center. There's only 2 in the Air Force, which is in Warner Robins, Georgia. This kind of carried with me. And I thought, you know what? Should I revisit this? Is it worth it? Did I hit something? Maybe it's need to know. I started finding the same things at Robins Air Force Base. I was now doing some more investigation work. Part of what I did was to use a high volume air sampler to air sample up to, I'd say, a football field in about 10 minutes. I also conducted soil sampling because I thought, you know, if this is real and they are spraying this, it's going to get to the ground. So I conducted air sampling, I conducted soil sampling, and I was getting high levels of these contaminants. When I started asking the question again under a new commander, I never in my life thought I would have somebody look me in the face and tell me, I am questioning you. Is there something wrong with you? You've been looking really depressed lately. You know I can put you under mental evaluation for...
How sick is that, this idiot? You know, they ought to be fired, discharged. You know, there was a day when, you know, the military had ethics. Now they just hire crap.
Up to 120 days. Who would take care of your daughter? Because I was divorced at the time. As soon as I heard that, I knew. It validated everything I ever thought. And I thought, I've spent 9 years of my life trying to protect human health. And here we are, violating law after law after law. Just sitting here, instead of protecting the people, we are poisoning the people. And I never got up so much courage from that fear of being thrown in a cage. Because when you're in the military...
So this good, ethical person resigned. And what I'm saying is, even if it were some stupid national security thing, they could do this over a quarantined Air Force base somewhere and not dump and run experiments over people unless that's their objective. They're not, because how long has this been going on? I mean, this has been going on, that UN meeting was back in, God, I forgot what the date was. It was a long time before 2016. They would have had their answers by now. I think they're doing this to do stuff to us. And there are other evil crap they want to do to other people around the world. Because this government's just downright evil now. They're run by Nazis. I'm convinced of it. So what you need to do is call your representatives, and not just once. And get those flyers out and get people moving. Because they're nothing but liars. That's the only power of the devil, is to lie. And they got to answer to us. Okay? If you don't make them answer, they're going to get away with more hell. So get out there and get to it. Like I'm doing. They have no right to be doing this. And we, God, Yahweh's people, He created that sky. He's way over them. They're a bunch of dumb brains. They don't know what the hell they're doing, even if they tried. And we have all power and authority over them. They need to remember that. And that's all I got to say.